Who created the term open source software? And when was it created? I mean, this may be a silly question to many of you. The term open source is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It must have existed since forever. But someone had to be the first person to say it. So who and when and why? These are important questions from computer history. And myself and Eric Raymond, the legendary ESR, the author of the Cathedral and the Bazaar, and an absolute legend in the open source programming world, have very different accounts of when this term was created and by who. In fact, yesterday on X, we really got into it. We went back and forth and things got a little bit heated. I'm going to walk all of you through this argument now because I think it's incredibly interesting from the historical point of view. You follow along here, and when we're all done with everything, you tell me who created the term open source. You tell me who is right about all this. So this all started yesterday. Eric was over on X, and he was making a post about something not related to open source. But in it, he made the following statement, quote, "I'm pretty good at recognizing usefully infectious memes when I see them. I didn't invent the term open source either. That was Christine Peterson." Okay, end quote. And I just had to point out to people that Christine Peterson, from my point of view, did not invent the term open source. It's a myth. That's a myth that occurred. In fact, I've been publishing articles on this exact topic for about 4+ years now. I have an article up in the Lunduke Journal called "Who Really Coined the Term Open Source? The Story You've Heard Is Wrong." And the story that most people tell goes something like this. In 1998, a group of people were working with Netscape on the open sourcing of Netscape, right? Of making the source code for Netscape open source, at least the engine component, which originally led to Mozilla and ultimately led to Firefox. And that during those planning meetings, Christine Peterson had a unicorn sprout from her brain, and she thought up the phrase open source software for the first time in human history, and they applied it and used it. That story has been repeated by Red Hat, by the Open Source Initiative, by Eric Raymond, who created the open source initiative, by so many computer historians over the years that it has been taken as fact. But is it really? Well, so I post about it. I sent Eric the link to my article where I provided him a number of examples where the term open source software was used prior to that instance in 1998. In fact, by corporations, by organizations, by the BSD software community, and more. And Eric responded, quote, "Some of your prior sites are misleading. At the time Christine proposed the term, I was aware that there was a history in English-speaking intelligence circles of using the term open source contrastively with covert source for information derived from public sources such as newspapers and maps and railroad schedules. After the meeting," they're talking about the 1998 meeting here, "I did some digging and found 2 of the Usenet sites that you give myself. Neither Christine nor I was aware of either or any of the others before the fact. Thus, her creative act does count as invention." Now, what are those Usenet sites he's talking about? Well, I point out that the term open source was in constant regular use on many different platforms, including Usenet as far back as 1990, including this one post from December 4th, 1990, posted by Kent, the man from Xanth. That was his username. Quote, "BSD's open source policy meant that user-developed software could be ported among platforms," end quote. Open source policy, open source software. Then in 1993, I point to Jerome Jerry Schneider, he was sitting here talking about opening the source code for Windows NT. This was back in 93. Quote, "Open source is best for everyone in the long run," specifically talking about releasing the source code for Windows NT. The examples go on and on and on. They are legion. But I continue. Quote, this is again from Eric Raymond. When I wrote my open source call to action a few weeks later in 1998, I stated that I was aware of the prior intelligence community usage and considered it a feature rather than a bug. The implication of anybody involved is lying about the course of events is false and offensive. He's saying that I'm being offensive and inaccurate here. It is not at all uncommon for technical terms of art to be independently reinvented multiple times. We knew of prior usages at the time, and I have since written that one or two others were discovered that later surprised us. You will note that nowhere in OSI's account did we claim to be the first users of the term. Interesting. So, of course, I had to respond because he was wrong on so many counts. This is my response. Quote, "You are incorrect, Eric. September 10th, 1996, 2 years before Christine Peterson used the term, Caldera released their DOS as open source." Say what now? They used the term, which clearly had already been in common usage in a way which was widely known and reported throughout the computer industry. Here's a screenshot of it. This is the press release from 1996, 2 years before the open source initiative. Eric Raymond and many others claim that they invented the term open source. Caldera announces open source code model for DOS. DRDOS plus the internet equals Caldera DOS. Again, it's the Caldera Open DOS. And the whole press release goes on to talk about open source software, open sourcing the code and whatnot repeatedly over and over again, clearly in such a way that makes it obvious they were, from a corporate standpoint, using the open source commonly used phrasing as a marketing standard, right? They were using it as part of their marketing because people understood the idea of open source software so prominently and so commonly by this point in 1996. I continue. I'm replying to ESR's statement that the implication of anybody involved is lying about the course of events is false and offensive, end quote. Okay, so this is me responding to him. I am not implying you are lying, but you are incorrect. The current leadership of the OSI is also fully aware of the actual historical usage of the term, because I've informed them. They've had discussions about it, but they continue to repeat the false history. Eric said, "You will note that nowhere in OSI's account did we claim to be the first users of the term." Again, this is incorrect. Christine Peterson herself claims to have created the term. Quote, "I am the originator of the term open source software." This was from an opensource.com article. And she goes on to repeat that over and over and over again. Eric Raymond stated repeatedly that she invented the term, and the OSI repeats that claim on their history of open source website at opensource.org. Now, what does the now here's the screenshot. Here's a screenshot how I coined it. "I am the originator of the term. Quote, I came up with it." End quote. Eric said, "Neither Christine nor I was aware of either or any of the others before that fact, thus her creative act does count as invention." Now here he's beginning to, it seems to be to acquiesce to my point that the term was in common usage prior to that, but they simply weren't aware of it. That seems to be the direction he's going, but his definition of the word invent allows his interpretation of history to be true. So I responded, "That is also incorrect. To invent something is by definition to create something which did not exist before. Prior to 1998, the term open source was already in common usage in the computer industry, widespread in the computer industry, even found in press releases of large software corporations. If Christine Peterson was somehow unaware that the term already existed, that does not matter. She did not invent it." Here's the Merriam-Webster definition of invent: "To produce something such as a useful device or process for the first time." First time. It's a little bit critical here. And I want to make this very clear. If you go back through computer periodicals and magazines of the early 1990s, you will be flooded with people talking about open source software. off the charts. It's huge, right? Granted, it got bigger as the 90s went on and into the early 2000s, but there's still a ton of article after article after article. Corporations doing press releases. I mean, people on Usenet chatting about it. It was just common knowledge. Well, Eric responded, "Your definition of invention is specious." My definition, by the way, is every dictionary I went and looked up agreed with my definition. Create something for the first time. Okay. Quote, "There are multiple cases of independent invention in the history of technology. For example, the telephone is often attributed to Alexander Graham Bell, but Meucci demonstrated a device capable of transmitting voice over wires, which he called the teletrafono in 1849, predating Bell's 1876 patent by a quarter century. The light bulb, the steam engine, the typewriter, and at least arguably the digital computer also had multiple inventors. Usually we describe a person as the inventor when he or she founds the continuous engineering tradition that reaches common usage." Okay. End quote on that one. So if now we're getting into an argument about what is the definition of invent, and when does the lineage of a word start, and now it's starting to get a bit silly. We're moving out of the realm of actual history, which was not really where I wanted to go with this, but that's, I don't know. It seems almost like Eric Raymond felt backed into a corner. He continued, "In common usage, one is said to invent something that is an act of creation, even if there is a prior art of which the inventor was unaware. This is exactly the case with Christine. I immediately thought of intelligence community use of the term open source when she proposed it, but she did not know of that usage until I explained it to her. Could we have been aware of Caldera's use of the term in 1996? Yes, but we weren't. And open source was not in common usage in 1998. I wish it had been. That would have been helpful to my goals. It was. It doesn't matter now because I succeeded anyway, but at the time, I would have welcomed having less of a hill to climb regarding the novelty of the term." Now, again, Eric Raymond did a tremendous amount of work relating to open source software, both in working on it, promoting it, and helping to encourage good licenses that were useful and effective in the world of open source. The amount of work Eric Raymond did relating to computing and open source software is historic. If you're writing a book of history of software, especially like in the 1990s, you can't do so and leave out Eric Raymond. The man is a legend, but he's wrong about the history here. And that doesn't take away from any of the work that he accomplished, though. He continues here. Quote from Eric Raymond. "I've said that I've learned of a handful of earlier uses on Usenet after the fact. I think it's notable that none of those people ever disputed OSI's account that Christine invented the modern usage of the term. I'm more than a little annoyed about your aspersions because I think Christine deserves a lot of credit for her imaginative leap. She gave us a rebranding tool that we needed. Ever since, I've been at pains to correct people when they misattribute the term, especially when they misattribute it to me." End quote. Okay. Again, I'm not trying to say anyone's bad or lying here, at least not Eric Raymond, but he is wrong. And I want to point out the inaccuracies here. Now, when pointing out that many people used this term on Usenet and elsewhere, and none of them corrected Christine Peterson's account, well, I don't think any of those individuals that I quoted thought they invented the term, because again, it was in common usage. I don't think Caldera thought they invented it. I don't think that the man from Xanth over on Usenet thought he invented it. It was just an obvious term that people had already been using. Now, I've been correcting people like the OSI on this for a number of years with a huge amount of documentation around it. The fact that people keep fighting this is bizarre. It shouldn't be a story, but it's too weird that people so adamantly demand that the phrase open source did not exist prior to 1998. Why? It was in common usage for years. I continue. So I'm responding to Eric's statement that could we have been aware of Caldera's usage of the term in 96? Yes, but we weren't. And the open source was not in common usage in 98. I wish it had been. Okay, so I responded. The term open source as relating to computer software was in common usage before 1998. The Caldera example proves this. In 1996, Caldera released DR-DOS as, quote, open source, renaming their operating system as OpenDOS and repeatedly referencing open source technology and the open source code model. This was widely known and covered throughout the computer industry. It was so widely known. I am confused at how a group of software industry professionals could not have known it. Like, you would have had to, for years, not read any trade magazines, any PC Worlds, any Dr. Dobbs journals, anything for years from between 96 and 98 to not know that open source was already in common usage, or that specific announcement of Caldera having purchased Digital Research's DOS. It would have been difficult, right? And that's one of those things that raises my eyebrow. How could that not have been known? Now, nowadays, 30 years later, I get not remembering that tidbit. But at the time, that was a known thing across the computer nerd world. Again, Eric says the following quote, I'm more than a little annoyed about your aspersion. Okay. Clear. I very much not mean to attack anyone's character here. Your work on open source has been tremendous and historically noteworthy in several ways. Again, noting the history of the term open source software does not take away from those accomplishments. Correctly noting the history of computing is important, and while the 1988-98 term usage of the term open source is without question historically significant, it is not where the term originated. And again, the meeting in 1998 that ultimately led to Mozilla and Netscape, and ultimately to the open source initiative, it was historically significant in the world of late 1990s and early 2000s open source software. It was a very, very important moment. It was a pivotal moment in that history, but it's not where that term came from. So Eric responded. The meaning and intent of Caldera's use, which we didn't know about until well after the founding of the open source initiative. In fact, if I knew about it before today, I had forgotten, was different in an important way. Caldera did not grant the right to reuse, modify, and redistribute. Their open source terms were what some wags later came to call source under glass. You could see it, but you weren't permitted to create a development ecosystem around it outside of any vendor's exclusive control. That this is not a quibble. The essence of open source in the hacker community before and after we named it was precisely that independence, the absence of any single point of control. That's not 100% true. In fact, what he's starting to decipher right now is different. Had I known of Caldera's usage at the time, I think I would have been sufficiently worried about confusion between what we were advocating under source and source under glass to deliberately invent a different term. So I respond. It appears that we agree then on a great deal relating to this history, that open source as a term relating to the availability of computer software code was in active use prior to 1998 by at least a few years. Your stance, Eric, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that Christine Peterson was not aware of that fact, therefore she invented it. In addition, you feel that some companies who use the term open source did so while using source code licenses which you do not feel properly embrace the spirit of open source as later redefined. Therefore, all usage of open source prior to 1998 did not happen. That's what Eric Raymond was arguing. And I posted this at the end because I realized this. After rereading what I just wrote, I realized that this all comes across as more than a little snarky. My intention truly isn't to be snarky. I'm having a difficult time understanding, based on what you've stated, why a commonly used term in 1996, like open source, is stricken from history because someone else said the same term in 1998 and other people later felt strongly about how that term should be used. I mean, this is an important point here, because once again, this was a term that was in common usage in the world of BSD software, at Microsoft. Seriously, it was, and many other companies and organizations and communities and in publications throughout the land. Open source was commonly in use. So, just to pull all this together, because I find this curious and fascinating. What do we know for certain at this point regarding the invention of the term open source? First, and this is critical, it was in common usage, specifically relating to software source code by 1990. Right? We know that for a fact. Articles, Usenet posts, later on press releases, everything. I mean, it was common usage, and this includes relating to BSD, Microsoft, and many others. Major corporations were using the term by 1996. So the first instance I'm able to find of a company branding things as open source, and even including the word open in the title of a product, was in 1996 with Caldera. That was the first time, as far as I can tell, a company branded things as open source. Christine Peterson claims to be the very first person to think of the term in 1998. Eric Raymond, the Open Source Initiative, and countless others, including Red Hat and many others, are absolutely passionate that it did not exist prior to 1998. And the more you question them on it, you can see it in my chat with Eric. Go back to the beginning and look at how his approach to it and his admission of whether or not it existed prior to that changes as the chat goes on. No matter what, they will consistently change their definition of words, their definition of the word invent or originate or create. The definition of the word open source will repeatedly change to try and make it so that under no circumstances will they admit that the term existed prior to 1998. They're passionate about it. Why? I mean that with all respect and love. I truly do. I do not understand what is the passionate motivation for demanding that the term not be used prior to 1998. It doesn't affect the work of the Open Source Initiative. It doesn't affect software licensing. It doesn't affect the work that so many people, including Eric Raymond, did around open source software, including writing essays and books and worked with communities and worked on software. I mean, all of it, right? It doesn't affect any of that. So what is the passion there for demanding that the word did not exist before that one meeting in 1998 when it just sprung forth from someone's brain? Because that didn't happen. Whenever I see things where someone tries to rewrite history, even in a way that seems like, okay, well, is this really all that important? I mean, no, open source exists either way. And does it change what's happening nowadays? Not really. But history is important, right? The history of computing, for me, is a very important thing. And to wipe away years, nearly a decade, of articles, computer software code that was released, press releases from companies, all sorts of stuff that all used a phrase and an idea because you wanted to create it in a specific year in 1998. That's strange. That's bizarre. That is not factual and not historic. Now, if I'm wrong about this, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. And I mean this legitimately. If you guys think, oh my gosh, Lunduke, you are wildly out of line here. Obviously, people did not talk about open source software prior to that meeting in 1998. Okay, prove it to me. Prove to me that I've hallucinated everything, that I've absolutely just hallucinated every press release, every statement, every article, and then I will agree with you on that. But until such time, So I would also like to say, though, that this is a really cool usage for social media. It's cool that Lunduke and Eric Raymond got to sit down and chat about this. Now, clearly it was a little contentious. Eric got a little worked up. but just the same. And we didn't come to an agreement, not completely, though he did seem to, as the chat went on, agree increasingly with the facts that I was pointing out. But it's still good to have those chats because those are all out in the open. Other people can respond to them. Other people can fact check both me and Eric and respond to them and retweet them or whatever. And that's just fantastic. I do really like that. That's a really cool thing. Now, I invited Eric to come on the show to talk about this. He did not respond. I'm pretty sure he got my invite because he continued to be very active on X as that was going on. But he did not respond. I gave it about a day, and he never got back to me. The offer still stands, though. The offer still stands. If Eric Raymond would like to come on and discuss this, debate it passionately, relaxedly, however, I would love to have that conversation, because the reality is this. Eric Raymond was in the room in 1998 when he claims it was created, right? And I have no reason to doubt his recollection of the events of what happened in that room during those conversations in 1998. The only difference we have is what was happening in the computer industry prior to 1998, which I seem to be more knowledgeable of. If he wants to disagree, he can come on the show. I would like to also say flat out, thank you to all the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Today is my birthday, and I've had a fantastic birthday thus far. I wasn't going to do a show today, but this was too much fun to not talk about for me. I love the computer history stuff, and I love having disagreements about computer history stuff. It's just a ton of fun. But if any of you would like to give me a great birthday present, here's 3 ways you can do it. Go to lunduke.com and share out shows. Go find shows and share them out with people. In fact, you really want to have fun. Go find shows. I did a show. Let me see if I've got it here. Where I specifically said open source is anti-free speech. Go find that show from February 6th, just 12 days ago. Open source is anti-free speech. I put that show on every platform that the Lunduke Journal exists on. X and Rumble and YouTube and Locals and Substack and on the podcast feed, all of them. Share that show with some open source organizations and communities and see what they think. Ask them, hey, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think open source is anti-free speech? Is this community what is this community's feelings about what's discussed in this show? And see what they do. Now, if you do that, please screenshot it, the before and afters, because there's going to be a lot of organizations that are going to ban you and delete that post. But I would like the screenshots before and after that, because that's a really good test, a good litmus test, if you will, for if a particular organization, a foundation, a project, a company, etc., is or is not okay with free speech within their community, or will allow conservatives or centrist or right-leaning folks to exist within their community. It would be interesting to see what they do. So if you feel like giving me a present there, share those links around with those folks. Second, take the Great Tech Industry Demographic Survey. If it's before, Friday, February 20-something. Friday is when the survey ends. There's already thousands and thousands of people that have responded. Take the survey if you haven't yet. The more data, the better. It's fantastic. And third, support the Lunduke Journal. We've got deals going on throughout the entire month of February where yearly subscriptions are half off. Lifetime subscriptions are available under a massive discount throughout the whole month of February. Again, if you go to lunduke.com, there's links right there. Or you can just grab a monthly subscription, or just encourage people to get subscriptions, and that gives me a happy birthday. That, keeping the lights on here at the Lunduke Journal, that's a pretty gosh darn good birthday. Give the gift of truly independent tech journalism on Lunduke's birthday. It should be a national holiday. It should be a national holiday where we celebrate big tech-free tech journalism. That should be a national thing. If anyone has a line to President Trump and can encourage him to make February 18th big tech-free tech journalism day, let's get on that, because that That sounds like a winner to me. But thank you again to everybody, lunduke.com. And with that, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.